turn left at the iron railings, then first right through the iron gate into the gardens. Keeping the cathedral on your left, you will pass by the old St Paul's cross. The stone pillar represents the good, evil and conscience of the church. Continue past the statue of John Wesley and walk out of the garden. On your right, you will see an entrance into a new square with modern buildings and a column statue in its centre. This is Paternoster Square, and is home to the new London Stock Exchange. Keep walking ahead, with St Paul's Churchyard behind you. At the end of the cathedral, turn left. You are now at the main entrance of St Paul's. The history of the site that St Paul stands on can be traced back to Roman times. Records show that a temple originally stood on this site in honour of Diana, goddess of the moon. Records also show that the first cathedral was built on this site back in 604 AD, when the first Christian king of Kent, Ethelbert, built a palace in the city. This cathedral was used by the Saxon kings until Edward the Confessor completed Westminster Abbey in 1066, over 450 years later. During the 7th century, the cathedral was destroyed by fire and rebuilt in stone by the Bishop of London. The Vikings who marauded up the Thames destroyed this cathedral in the middle of the 10th century during the Dark Ages. The cathedral was rebuilt by the Council of the English Church and was again destroyed by fire towards the end of the 11th century. The rebuilding of the new cathedral began immediately in 1088 by the Bishop of London with the financial support of King William I and his son William II. The new cathedral was one of the largest buildings in England and was substantially larger and taller than the present building. The spire was reputed to have been over 150 metres, 490 feet high, and was the highest spire ever built. The cathedral was also used as a prison during this period. With the Reformation of the Church by Henry VIII in 1534, and the printing of the first complete English version of the Bible in 1535, the cathedral lost financial support. It was left to deteriorate, and became a general area of trade and money-lending. Even the tombs were used as trade counters. Many fights, sinister trades, and murders took place within the confines of the building and the surrounding area during this period. After the death of Henry VIII, general repairs started to improve the building, but it was not until the reign of James I, during the early part of the 17th century, that substantial repairs took place. These were delayed further by the Civil War from 1642 to 1647, when the Restoration Fund was seized by Oliver Cromwell to pay for the cost of running his army. During the Civil War, the cathedral was used as a stable and barracks for Oliver Cromwell's cavalry, and it is reputed that he rode on horseback through the cathedral. There was also an occasion when a circus horse performed tricks in the cathedral, including scaling the stairs to the bell tower. With your back to the main entrance of the cathedral, turn to your left and pass by the statue of Queen Anne. Queen Anne had 17 children, although most of them died in childhood. She also had a reputation for being a heavy drinker and regularly falling to the floor in an intoxicated state, showing all her petticoats. It is believed that the expression, "Annie's dead," meaning a lady's petticoat is showing below her dress, came from this regular event in the royal court. Keep walking with the cathedral on your left-hand side. On the other side of the coach park there is a garden. The far right-hand corner of the garden is a good position to take a photograph of St Paul's. This garden is on the site where the Old Change once stood. The Old Change dates back to 1213, and it is where gold and silver bullion was stored for minting into coins of the realm. With your back to St Paul's, Exit the garden from the far right-hand corner. Cross the road, turning left down New Change Street, then take the first right into Watling Street. Watling Street is where the old Roman road passed through the city on its way to Dover. 2,000 years ago, Roman centurions rode their war horses and marched their legions along the same route you are now walking. On your right is a stone and bronze memorial recording the founding of Australia in 1788. Continue down Watling Street and cross over Bread Street and Bow Lane. When you reach the end of Watling Street, you will see Queen Victoria Street. Cross the road at the crossing to your left and continue into Queen Victoria Street. Continue along Queen Victoria Street. On your right, at the end, by the junction and traffic lights, is Mansion House. Mansion House dates back to 1750 and is famous for its magnificent Egyptian hall. For the last 250 years, Mansion House has been the official residence of the Lord Mayor of London during his term in office. A man normally holds the position, although there has been one Lady Mayor. The position of Chief Magistrate, or Lord Mayor of the City of London, dates back to 1190. The city is the oldest municipal corporation in the world. The position was confirmed in the Royal Charter, also known as the Magna Carta, signed by King John in 1215. Within the city, the position, although largely ceremonial today, is only one below that of the reigning monarch and their male heirs to the throne. If the Lord Mayor dies in his year of office, he is permitted to be buried in St Pauls Cathedral. This has only happened once. Your nearest underground station at this point is Bank. Opposite the Royal Exchange, on the left-hand side, is the Bank of England. The Bank of England was originally founded in 1694, when Parliament passed the Tonnage Act to levy taxes on shipping and alcohol to raise funds for King William III, who needed to raise money to pay for the war with France. For many years afterwards, the bank was known as the Tonnage Bank. The building was completed in 1734 and was extended over the course of the century to cover a site of 3.5 acres, 1.5 hectares. In 1780, the bank was attacked by an angry mob. The rioters were fought off and held back by the bank clerks, who reputedly made bullets out of their inkwells. From that moment on, until 1973, a brigade of guards protected the bank. Apart from the exterior walls, the building was completely rebuilt between 1925 and 1940. The bank is affectionately referred to as the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street. There is also a very interesting museum showing the history and financial dealings of the bank from 1694. This museum is free to visit. Continue down Threadneedle Street, and you will see a tall concrete building on your left on the corner of Old Broad Street. This is the site of the old London Stock Exchange. The new building is situated in Paternoster Square near St Paul's. The sale of shares in companies first occurred in the middle of the 16th century, with the formation of the African and Russian trading companies. By the end of the 17th century, there were at least 150 companies trading their shares either privately, by auction, or through brokers. In 1697, an Act was passed by Parliament requiring all brokers to be approved by the Lord Mayor, take an oath of honesty, and wear a medal of office. They could not deal in shares for their own benefit or account. Any misconduct would result in banishment from the exchange, being fined £500, a large sum in those days, and being humiliated in public for 3 days by having their neck and arms locked in the stocks. In the 1770s, a group of share brokers purchased a building in Threadneedle Street, and the Stock Exchange was born. In 1800, the Stock Exchange was moved to a new building constructed on this site. It was previously an old bare-knuckle boxing hall where many bruised and battered fighters fought until one was knocked out or threw in the towel. The Exchange occupied this site on the corner of Old Broad Street for over 200 years. There are now over 5,000 members of the Exchange, and it is larger than the entire European stock market. We will now continue to Leadenhall Market. Continue down Threadneedle Street. Threadneedle Street was named after the 3 needles that form part of the coat of arms of the Needlemakers' Company. On the right, about halfway down Threadneedle Street, you will pass the Merchant Tailors' Hall. Many guilds, livery companies, and Freemasons were formed by military and tradespeople to represent the skills of their craft, and to provide a meeting place to discuss and safeguard the standards and future of their industry. These guilds and livery companies started from as early as the reign of Edward the Confessor during the 11th century, and still form part of the city scene today. They still have some of the privileges handed down over the centuries, one of those being awarded the title Freeman of the City of London. A freeman of the City of London, amongst other privileges, is still, to this day, allowed to drive a flock of sheep across London Bridge, although there is no logical reason for this apart from causing a major traffic problem. Continue walking to the end of Threadneedle Street. At the end of Threadneedle Street is Bishopsgate. Cross over the pedestrian crossing and turn to your right. Then take the first street on your left, called Leadenhall Street, and the first right into Whittington Avenue. In front of you is Leadenhall Market. Leadenhall Market dates back to the 14th century. By 1450, the area was the main market for game and general food provisions in London. The entire market was destroyed in the Great Fire of London in 1666. It was rebuilt to provide 3 separate trading areas for all food provisions, including meat, fruit, vegetables and herbs. The market was rebuilt again in 1880 into the splendid Victorian cast-iron covered area that you see today. Its busy and very attractive environment is now home to cafes, bars and fine food shops. Return back to Leadenhall Street and turn right. Continue down Leadenhall Street, and at the corner of Lime Street is Lloyds of London. Lloyds of London dates back to the 1680s, when at Lloyd's Coffee House merchants would agree their marine insurance with other wealthy merchants. Lloyd's first Register of Shipping was published in the 1760s. Lloyd's is the largest insurance market in the world. All the risks are underwritten, hence the insurer is referred to as the underwriter. These underwriters trade from boxes. This name derived from the underwriters in the very early days carrying a box to sit on to agree their insurance risk with the merchants. These groups of underwriters are formed into syndicates, and these syndicates form Lloyd's. Each of these syndicates have members who invest, and all of these syndicates accept the entire insured risk for their personal profit or loss. In consequence, they are personally liable for the full extent of their private wealth to meet any losses their syndicate may suffer. The present building is not to everyone's taste, but it includes an interesting visitors' gallery that exhibits the history and operation of the Lloyd's insurance market. Lloyd's also is home to the famous Lutein bell that was salvaged from the British warship HMS Lutein in 1859. The bell is rung when important news has to be made to the underwriters. There is 1 strike for bad news and 2 strikes for good news. The building still has guards dressed in ancient waiter's costume, as a reminder that Lloyd's origin was in a modest coffee house. We will now continue the tour by walking to the Tower of London via Tower Hill. The cigar-shaped building on your left is affectionately nicknamed the Gherkin. It was designed by the famous architect Sir Norman Foster. cross over Lime Street and continue along Leadenhall Street. Take the next street on the right, called Billiter Street. Billiter Street was the origin of the 300-year-old London saying, "The bawdy beggars of Billiter Street," as the street was known for poverty and the raucous behaviour of its inhabitants. Continue to the end of Billiter Street. At the end of Billiter Street you will see Fenchurch Street. Fenchurch Street can be traced to the very origins of London. Celtic remains dating back over 3,000 years have been found in excavations here, together with old Roman paved roads. Fenchurch Street railway station was the first railway terminus in the City of London and dates back to 1840. Prior to 1850 and the introduction of steam power, the trains were pulled by cables, and the station staff had to push the trains the final few yards so that the passengers could step onto the platform. Continue on down Fenchurch Street until you pass Lloyd's Registry of Shipping. After passing Lloyd's Registry of Shipping, take the next turning on your right into Lloyd's Avenue. Walk under the left-hand side railway bridge into a street called Cooper's Row. Continue to the end of Cooper's Row. You are now at Tower Hill, and the rear of the Tower of London can be seen directly in front of you. The gardens you see to your right are a memorial to merchant seamen who lost their lives at sea. To the left of the gardens, just after the Tower Hill Underground, is a raised landscape area. Go up the steps, and you will see a sundial showing the history of the main events and dates of the City of London around its base. We will now continue to the Tower of London. Halfway down on your left there is a stone wall that is a surviving section of the old Roman City of London, outer defence wall, dating back 1800 years. The statue is of the Roman Emperor Trajan. Continue down the steps and go through the underpass. At the end of the underpass you will see the remains of an old medieval gateway into the city. Turn right along the pathway, keep the tower on your left and head towards the ticket office. Continue downhill towards the river until you reach the river for a good position to take a photograph of Tower Bridge. The River Thames is the longest river in Britain, over 240 miles, 400 kilometres long. There are over 100 species of fish living in the river. Generally, the Thames is clean, but due to the speed of the tides, the water is very muddy from the disturbance to the riverbed. The Tower of London is one of the most famous landmarks in the city, with an interesting and violent history. During the last 1,000 years, it has been a fort, a palace, a royal armoury, a royal observatory, the Royal Mint, a zoo, and perhaps most famously, a prison and place of execution. The tower dates back to the reign of William I. William I was the last invader to successfully land in England. In 1066 he defeated King Harold just outside Hastings in Kent. It is folklore that King Harold died from an arrow wound to his eye during the battle. The original building was a temporary timber fortification built by William the Conqueror in 1066 to stamp his authority on the residents of the city. Shortly afterwards, in 1077, construction of the White Tower commenced and was completed 23 years later in 1100. Gundulf, a monk from Normandy, designed the building. He was known for his skill in designing churches and fortifications. Located at the heart of the Tower of London is the White Tower, so named after being whitewashed in 1240 during the reign of Henry III. It is the oldest remaining building within the Tower of London. The tower is the finest example of a medieval fort in Britain. The walls are over 15 feet, 4.5 metres, thick at the base and over 90 feet, 27 metres, high. There is only one entrance that had an external flight of stairs, and these stairs could be removed in times of danger. The lower level was used as a dungeon. The first floor housed the guards and servants, the second floor comprised the Great Hall and the Chapel of St Peter's, and the top floor was the royal accommodation and bedrooms. Members of royalty would always have their accommodation on the top floor, as the guards could protect them from any attempt at murder or to dispossess them from the throne. Around the tower, the building of further fortifications and other towers took place. The expansion into a palace and fortress occurred primarily during the 13th century, during the reign of Henry III, the boy king, who was 8 years old when he succeeded to the throne. He was the third longest reigning monarch after Queen Victoria, who reigned for 63 years, and George III, also known as the Mad King, who was on the throne for 60 years. Henry III held the throne of England for 57 years. During this period, the average life expectancy was less than 40 years. By the time of Edward I's death in 1307, most of the buildings you see today had been completed. The buildings remained as a royal palace until the 17th century during the reign of James I. James I succeeded to the throne after the death in 1603 of Elizabeth I, who had many suitors but never married. She was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII. The main towers of interest are the Wardrobe Tower and the Bell Tower. The Bell Tower gained its name from the bell in the belfry that was tolled every time an execution took place. St Thomas's Tower, better known as Traitor's Gate, you see as you walk towards Tower Bridge. It was built when the outer wall was added during the reign of Richard II. Most of the prisoners were brought to the tower by river transport, and many of those who entered through Traitor's Gate never saw freedom again. The tour now continues to St Catherine's Dock and Execution Dock. And follow the path round the dock, cross over the pedestrian bridge. You are now at St Catherine's Dock. The docks were opened in 1828, after the demolition of over 1,200 small houses and 11,300 residents being dispossessed. Warehouses were constructed around the dock, but as the lock to the river was rather narrow, it could not serve large ships. This limited its success as a commercial dock. Cargo coming into the dock mainly consisted of imported ivory, elephant tusks, mammoth tusks, and walrus and hippopotamus teeth. Docklands, or the London docks, date back to Roman times. They became the major port of England during the 17th and 18th century, and continued as a major commercial area until the latter part of the 20th century. The first police force in England was formed in 1798 to protect the London docks from thieves, smugglers and pirates, who could easily target any of the 8,000 vessels which could be moored at any one time on a 6-mile stretch of the river. A little way downriver from London Bridge is Execution Dock. This is where captured pirates and smugglers were hanged for their crimes, then chained to the dock at low tide. They were then left chained to the dock for their bodies to be submerged for 3 tides. Captain Kidd, an infamous pirate, met his end here at Execution Dock. There was initially a force of 200 armed officers paid by the government. This area and many of the other docks have now been reconstructed or converted to residential use. We will now continue towards Tower Bridge. Follow the quayside path around the dock, keeping the water on your right, until you see Butler's Wharf on the far side of the river. Go over the footbridge, turn left, and walk along by the side of the river towards Tower Bridge. This is a good position for a photograph. Continue walking towards Tower Bridge. Tower Bridge is the most famous and best-loved bridge in London. The bridge was built following an Act of Parliament, which was passed in 1885, authorising the construction of a Gothic-style bridge with a clear opening span of 200 feet, 62 metres, and headroom above high tide of 135 feet, 42 metres. The Prince of Wales, who was the eldest son of Queen Victoria, our longest reigning monarch, laid the first masonry stone. A great ceremony was held in 1984 when the Prince of Wales returned and opened the completed bridge. The high-level footbridge was served by lifts and during the early days used by pedestrians. But it was closed from 1909 until 1982 as it was increasingly being used for suicide leaps into the river. The original hydraulic machinery used to lift and lower the spans was in service until 1976, when it was replaced by electrical motors. The bridge is still raised over 400 times a year. At the time of its design and build, and even today, it is a wondrous feat of engineering. The opening sections are known as bascules. In 1952, a London bus travelling across the bridge had to jump from one bascule to the other when the bridge began to open. In 1967, a wealthy American gentleman expressed his wish to purchase that London Bridge. He mistakenly believed he was purchasing Tower Bridge, and was obviously unaware that there was more than one bridge in London, and that there was actually a bridge called London Bridge. What he purchased was the old stone London Bridge, for which he paid over $2 million. This did not include the costs for demolition, transport, and reconstruction in Arizona, USA. Walk over Tower Bridge. After the main tower on the far side of the bridge, take the staircase down to the river walk and turn right along the river towards the warship. Along this side of the river is a good position to take photographs of both the Tower of London and Tower Bridge. Continue along the walk until you reach HMS Belfast. HMS Belfast is the last remaining World War II Royal Navy heavy cruiser. The ship saw action throughout the conflict, including leading the Normandy landings on D-Day, the 6th of June 1944. This ship was commissioned in 1938 and played a leading part in the destruction of the German battleship Scharnhorst. Continue along the river walk, and to your left you will see Hayes Galleria. Hayes Wharf, to use its original name, was the oldest and largest dock in London, and provided the first dock refrigeration facility. The famous explorer Shackleton left this wharf to begin his disastrous trip to the Arctic in 1921. Continue along the river walk and go up the steps onto London Bridge. There has been a bridge on this site for over 2,000 years. The first bridge was built by the Romans, whose engineers decided this was the most convenient position to provide a crossing. The River Thames was much wider and shallower then than it is today. The first bridge was built of timber and was repaired and rebuilt on many occasions. 1,000 years ago, during the Dark Ages, the bridge was burnt down to divide the forces of the Danish Vikings, and it is believed this was the event that gave us the popular nursery rhyme, "London Bridge is falling down." Since this time, the bridge on various occasions has been swept away or burnt down. It was not until the end of the 12th century that a bridge was built of brick and stone. This 12th century bridge survived for nearly 600 years and was a hive of activity and commerce, with houses, shops, and a church being built on the bridge. There was a drawbridge on the south side, and many of the buildings were very ornate, some houses decorated with Dutch gables and onion domes. It became a great attraction to the residents of London. There were 19 arches supporting the bridge, helping to slow down the flow of the river. At times, during the cold winter months, the river would freeze over completely, and fairs would be held on the ice. In 1213, a great fire broke out at both ends of the bridge. The residents and firefighters were trapped in the houses and shops situated on the bridge, and even with ships coming to their aid, over 3,000 people lost their lives. On the southern end of the bridge, there used to be the Great Gatehouse. This is where the heads of traitors were dipped in tar to preserve them, and then stuck on spikes and left until they fell off into the river. This custom was finally stopped by Charles II in 1661. In the middle of the 18th century, the houses were removed from the bridge. A new bridge was completed in 1831 and opened by King William IV. This bridge lasted until 1972, when the present bridge, which is the widest bridge in London, was opened. The bridge built in 1831 was carefully demolished stone by stone and transported to and reconstructed in Arizona, at Lake Havasu City. London Bridge is believed to be the reason why the British drive on the left side of the road. The bridge was originally covered in buildings, and the roadway through the centre was fairly narrow, not more than 13 feet, 4 metres. Around 1734, the aldermen of the City of London passed a decree that due to the heavy pedestrian flow and number of vehicles passing over the bridge, that all persons and vehicles would travel down the left-hand side. The reason for choosing the left-hand side was the position of the city on the north bank and the position of Southwark on the south bank. To go on the right, the traffic would have needed to cross over at each end of the bridge, causing further congestion. Continue over London Bridge and take the first turning on your right into Monument Street. Directly in front of you is the monument. The monument was built on the instructions of Parliament in commemoration of the Great Fire of London in 1666. The column was designed by Sir Christopher Wren, with his associate and friend Robert Hooke. It was completed in 1677. The total height of the stone column is 202 feet, or 62 metres. This makes it one of the highest freestanding columns in the world. There are 311 steps to the top, and you will need to be reasonably fit to make the climb. The column is positioned exactly 202 feet to the west of the original site of the King's Bakery in Pudding Lane. This is where the Great Fire was believed to have started accidentally. The iron cage at the viewing gallery was constructed in 1842 in the interests of public safety to protect them from falling bodies after the 6th suicide. There is a conspiracy theory about the Great Fire that has never quite been substantiated. It is suggested that King Charles II had the fire started deliberately, as the entire city was in the final stages of a terrifying and uncontrollable plague that had been spread by an infestation of Norwegian rats. Over 100,000 people had already died. The fire was devastating and destroyed over 2/3 of the city, but it also killed all the rats, and the plague finally disappeared. Following the fire, the king decreed that all new buildings should be constructed of brick and stone to avoid conditions that allowed fire to spread quickly between adjoining buildings. Sir Christopher Wren produced a wonderful vision for the city, with wide avenues and grand Italian-style palazzos. This was never realized, as the king respected the pressure from the residents to rebuild their houses on their old foundations. You now need to walk back towards London Bridge and the river. On your left, you will see Adelaide House. There is a public access to the riverside terrace on your left, just past the entrance to Adelaide House. Go down the staircase on your left, following the signs to the Thames Path. Turn right at the bottom and follow the signs for Thames Path West. Go past and under the brick towers and the river bridge of Cannon Street railway station. Continue along the Thames Path West until you arrive at the next bridge. This is Southwark Bridge. Follow the path through Fruiter's Passage. At the far end, by the river, turn immediately left at 3 Barrels Walk and go up the staircase onto the bridge. Southwark is the oldest community on the south side of the River Thames, and was the main entrance to the City of London from this side of the river. Southwark dates back to Roman times. The word clink, a slang word for prison, is thought to have originated from this area, as there was a prison in Clink Street. Southwark Bridge was completed in 1820, and was known for its resplendent character. At the time, it was the largest single-span bridge constructed from cast iron in the world. The original bridge was demolished and rebuilt in 1920. We now continue on to Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. Continue over Southwark Bridge. At the far end there is a staircase down to the river walk. Go down the steps and continue along the river walk until you reach the Globe Theatre. The Globe Theatre you see today is an accurate reconstruction, completed in 1992, of the original Globe Theatre. The Globe was a timber theatre built in 1598. The playwright William Shakespeare was both an actor and shareholder. The theatre, as with many other theatres in those days, was open air, and plays were acted during the summer months. At this time, only men were allowed to act, as it was considered an unacceptable profession for women, so males played all the female parts. Many of the plays written by William Shakespeare were first performed at the Globe. The theatre was destroyed in 1613, when during a performance cannons were fired and the discharge set light to the thatch roof. The theatre was rebuilt from public donations and a royal grant, as Queen Elizabeth I regularly frequented the theatre and had plays performed at her palaces. In 1645, the theatre was demolished by the Puritans. They considered it an ungodly act to attend and enjoy this type of entertainment. There is an excellent museum in the Globe depicting the life and times of the theatre during the early 1600s. Directly opposite is the Millenium pedestrian footbridge. This bridge takes you back to St Pauls Cathedral and the starting point of the tour. The Millenium footbridge was built to commemorate the new century and was completed in 2000. Unfortunately, when it first opened to the public, it swayed erratically as a result of pedestrians walking across the bridge. The bridge had to be closed for over a year as the engineers tried to solve the problem. They achieved this with the distribution of additional weights under the bridge to increase its stability and counteract the motion of movement that walking created. We will now return to St Paul's Underground Station, the starting point of your tour. Cross over the Millenium Bridge, and at the end of the bridge continue over the pedestrian crossing. On reaching St Paul's, turn right, keeping St Paul's on your left-hand side.